Coming up, the 2022 Pulitzer Prize goes to a Navajo musician, and we get a pandemic update, plus politics with Holly Cook-Macaro. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Aminawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. With less than 100 days until the primary election in Hawaii, Congressman Kai Kahele is running for a new office. Last week, the Democrat announced he is running for governor in his hometown of Hilo on the Big Island. Kahele had only been elected to Congress for one term before his announcement. He pledged to run a grassroots campaign, running on a platform of fixing big money in politics.
We need a leader who understands your struggles, who can bring people together, who is not beholden to lobbyists, special interests, corporations, or wealthy mainland donors. And so today I have one clear message for those who think they can buy our government. Hawaii is not for sale.
Kahele said he will not take any donations over $100. He also said he will not take donations from big corporations or political action campaigns. Kahele will face off against Hawaii's Lieutenant Governor Josh Green and the state's former First Lady Vicky Cayetano. The winner of the primary is largely expected to win the general election, given that Hawaii has only elected one Republican as governor in its state history. Well, there's another leader at the Indian Health Service. Last week, the agency announced Benjamin Smith as the deputy director of the IHS. Smith is a citizen of the Navajo Nation. This role leads the agency's operations. It is also responsible for creating collaboration between IHS and tribes to increase access to health programs. In a statement, Smith said, "I have always been passionate about serving our American Indian and Alaska Native people and look forward to continuing my career at IHS with new challenges and responsibilities." Prior to this position, Smith served in other capacities at IHS headquarters, including as Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs. The state of North Dakota is challenging the mineral rights of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. A decision in February by the federal government awarded lucrative mineral rights under a Missouri River reservoir to the MHA Nation. Last week, the state's Attorney General's office filed notice with the U.S. District Court. The office plans to intervene in the tribe's lawsuit against the federal government. This has been a long-running dispute. Earlier this year, the Interior Department ruled that the tribes own the mineral rights under the river. At stake is an estimated $100 million in unpaid royalties held in trust and future payments certain to come from oil drilling beneath the river. MHA Chairman Mark Fox says the state's challenge was expected and that the three tribes will continue to fight. After more than 2 years of First Nations, Carver is finally receiving resolution after he and his granddaughter were handcuffed by police. Maxwell and Tori Ann Johnson received a private apology, a payment, and a pledge from the Bank of Montreal to update its policies on how Indigenous identification is handled in the future. APTN's national news team has more.
In December 2019, Maxwell Johnson wanted to open an account for his granddaughter. A bank worker instead called police because they had, quote, fraudulent Indian status cards. Today, Maxwell Johnson closed his account. Hailsuck Nation members outside the bank to show their support. Johnson and his granddaughter received an undisclosed payment from the bank. BMO will take part in a private apology ceremony. The bank will also display art created by Johnson at the branch where they were handcuffed.
It's been a long process with BMO, but I'm glad it's coming to an end, and I hope nobody else of color has to go through this themselves. It's not only hard on my family, but it's hard on our culture. I mean, our people. They felt what I was going through too, not only me, but my son and my granddaughter. So I just hope nobody else has to go through this with any big corporations like this.
A Choctaw citizen is helping revive the art of brain tanning animal hides. James Tom Jr. began learning the art as a kid growing up in Oklahoma. This indigenous method of tanning uses the animal's brain matter to soften and protect the hide. Now, after years of research and trial and error, Tom says he's perfected his process and is sharing that knowledge. He teaches classes in tribal communities with the Native American Student Alliance in Stillwater, Minnesota. Earlier this year, Tom worked with 10 students in grades 9 through 12 for more than 50 hours. They took 10 hides from a freshly butchered state to the final stage of usable brain-tanned leather. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, the pandemic and politics, plus an interview you don't want to miss with the first Native person to win a Pulitzer for music. We'll be right back. Just when we thought we were out of the woods, new variants are causing COVID-19 cases to rise in parts of the country and around the world. We're joined now by epidemiologist Dean Seneca. He leads Seneca Scientific Solutions and is a global expert in health sciences. Hi, Dean. Great to have you back.
Hey, it's great to be here. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I want to talk about this rise in cases that we're seeing nationwide. Where is this coming from?
Well, we're far from being over with the pandemic. I know that, some of our leading experts have said, well, we're past this phase. We're really not. There are increases in cases that we're seeing, let's say last week throughout all of Indian country, all cases were on the rise. This week, we're seeing significant increases in the Bemidji area and the Oklahoma area, and some small spurts throughout Indian country. So, this is far from over, and these variants are subvariants of the Omicron variant, in which we saw that huge spike at the end of January, beginning of February. And that's kind of where this is all coming from.
You, of course, have dealt with other very deadly viruses across the world. And when you're reflecting on how the U.S. in particular has handled the coronavirus pandemic, if you had to give the U.S. a letter grade in how we've handled it, what grade would you give the U.S.?
That's a very hard question. But quite honestly, we haven't done well, in my opinion. I would give it a C minus, maybe a D plus. Because we're the example when all the other countries in the world are looking toward the United States as being, the group, the example of how to suppress a virus and do prevention and do say social distancing, do vaccinations and all these other things in order to address a pandemic. And, to be quite honest with you, we haven't really done well, in my opinion. I mean, I think there are a lot of things, one of the things that I do keep saying is that, we're so much like a third world country than we're willing to admit. For example, look at how slow we got out of the gate regarding this. Look at how this has turned into politics, the individual versus the community, right? These are no-brainers, right? We should be focusing on the community, the greater good of everyone. Our prevention, look at all the anti-vaccination and misinformation that's on the website that's created by people within the country. These are like characteristics you see in third world countries, or you see in places that, where you have a population that isn't very educated or really understands, science. Right now, in my opinion, this is a real battle between science and knowledge, and quite honestly, ignorance. I mean, those are the two things that we're facing right now regarding this pandemic, and to, get over the hump, which I still think, that we have some real areas to be really cautious about when it comes to the fall and the winter season, when viruses really ramp up again.
We only have about a minute left, but maybe talk about those areas of caution that you're feeling.
Well, Dr. Fauci got on the TV and said, we're past this pandemic phase, we're into this other phase. I'm feeling, no, we're really not, because, some mutations, some things, because this virus is running rapidly. This is going to be the new normal, this COVID-19, within our communities. This does have the ability, the threat is still there with this COVID-19 virus and how it moves through a community, how it moves through a population. We could see some real damages in the fall and in the wintertime, as things kind of change. If this virus were to take another mutation in a different direction, we could be faced with a whole nother huge spread like we did with the Omicron variant, where pretty much almost the whole country was impacted. But the other thing I wanted to mention while I have a second is that, the children are what we really need to care for, because caregivers, right? The American Indian, Alaska Native population, the Asian Pacific Islander population, including this, we've lost so many caregivers in comparison to other groups, right? Many of those caregivers, had children and families to take care of, and COVID-19 took them. And the disparity there is insurmountable. It's like, 1 in every 130, families were impacted with caregiver loss. Comparison to the white population was like 1 in every 500. I mean, those are huge disparities. So a couple things. One is the COVID-19 has impacted these 2 years of educational attainment in our tribal communities, because we're actually seeing that now, that, those that weren't in the classroom, those that weren't really studying like they should be, or those that, didn't have access to good education, we're going to see that as the future moves on. And then the other is this impact on caregivers. So our kids in the future, they're going to be tested. They have a lot of catching up to do. And in some situations, those kids are going to be the primary caregivers in their families, in their communities. And that's a whole nother burden on top of them, giving the anxiety and depression and other things that the COVID-19 has brought light to in our communities.
Well, Dean, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you for having me. I deeply appreciate it.
He is the first Native person to receive a Pulitzer Prize for musical composition. Awarded to Voiceless Mass by Raven Chacon, the piece premiered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in November. Hello, Raven. Thank you for being here, and congratulations to you.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Start us off by telling us about this composition.
Yes, this composition was commissioned last year by a music organization in Milwaukee called Present Music, and was in collaboration with the United Church of Christ. And it was to utilize a massive pipe organ in the St. John the Evangelist Cathedral in Milwaukee. And so I wanted to write a piece, not only, in having this opportunity to write for this massive instrument, but thinking about the building that it is stewarded in, the church. and thinking about the church as a site of, gathering and prayer, but also this contradiction that the space itself allows for voices to be heard. Choirs can sing in it, but sometimes, it does not offer the space for people to express their voicings. And this is not limited to the church. This is something we see in universities and the academy and elsewhere. And so it considers that, this futility of trying to give voice to the voiceless instead of offering space.
Were you at all nervous to compose a piece like this, given that, as you said, Indigenous people haven't always been welcomed into spaces like the church?
Not at all. Any opportunity I can have to speak to, current events or the situation of Indigenous people today, I take that, and if that can be done with artwork or music, then that becomes a bit of a challenge, because music, sometimes doesn't have words, especially in this case. This was not a piece that had lyrics or libretto or any kind of other, programmatic notes to it. So to be able to speak to this urgency through music was what I tried to do, and I'm happy that it got acknowledged by Pulitzer.
I want to go exactly to that. Earlier this week, the Pulitzer board mentioned that you were the first Native person to win a Pulitzer in musical composition. Where were you when you found out that news, and what was your reaction?
I was in my studio, and normally I turn off the phone if I'm recording or writing, and the phone just kept going off the hook. I had no idea that I received this award, and I was getting texts by friends and family and saying I won, and I was completely taken by surprise, and eventually learned what was going on. So I'm completely honored and humbled by it all, that my music has made it to that level.
How do you think that you winning this award sets the groundwork for others who might be interested in applying for the Pulitzer or other kinds of awards like the Pulitzer?
Well, you just have to keep doing this for, decades. That's what I did. And, I performed music for 10 years for audiences that only had 5 people in them. And that's what you have to do. There's no, very few quick recognition that's going to happen, and it takes a lot of hard work. And there's not a whole lot of us Native folks that are making, composition or composing music. So hopefully there's more awareness of the need for music education in schools, art education in schools, especially in our Native communities where that's not always a priority. So I think that's the first step. And then, of course, higher education to getting those skills is the next step after that.
You, of course, teach students at IAIA. What do you think this award means for those students, and what exactly are you teaching them right now?
Yeah, just being aware of the other artwork that's being made out there. And, sometimes we're skeptical of that, thinking, why learn about, what's being made in the rest of the world? But artwork is a really good entry to other worldviews, thinking about what people are addressing in their work, let's say in Africa or Asia or a lot of these places. There's artists all over the world. And for Indigenous artists to connect with them, not necessarily the artists that are working in Europe and the rest of the country, but thinking about all these other ways of seeing the world is very exciting right now for Indigenous artists. And that's one of the main requirements, is just to look at as much art as possible and listen to as much music as you can.
What other kinds of projects are you working on at the moment?
Well, I usually don't say, I usually keep those a secret, but I'm working on a book, and the book is about some scores that I made for 13 Indigenous women composers. And these scores are currently on exhibition at the Whitney Biennial in New York. And this book goes deeper into the story behind these scores. So there will be a performance at the Whitney on July 16th that we are also preparing for.
Well, Raven, thank you so much again, and congratulations.
Thank you.
The U.S. Senate is holding a key vote on Wednesday that would codify Roe v. Wade into law. Holly Cook-Macaro is back to break this down and more. She's a partner at Spirit Rock Consulting and an ICT regular contributor. Hi, Holly. Welcome back.
Hi, Elliot.
Let's start off with this legislation to codify Roe v. Wade. Tell us about that.
Well, this vote today is really a bit of a messaging vote. As we all know, we are running up very close now onto the midterm elections. With the leak of the SCOTUS draft opinion, it's been, I think, 2 weeks now, there's really been a lot of discussion about which side that this leak is going to benefit the most. So Majority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer, Democratic Majority Leader in the Senate, has teed up this vote. He does not have he does not have the 60 votes to beat a filibuster. And as you know, there are 50 Democrats in the Senate. And we're not even quite sure he has the 50 votes. Although with Casey coming out, Senator Casey from Pennsylvania coming out earlier this week, indicating he would vote with Schumer, that was a good sign. But this vote is largely to put senators on the record as either supporting the codification of Roe v. Wade or opposing the codification of Roe v. Wade. That vote and the voting record will be fodder for the midterm elections, definitely. So this vote will fail today in the Senate. It is largely what we call a message vote.
So if I'm understanding correctly, a voter from a state would be able to say, my senator voted in favor or against this legislation, and therefore be able to decide whether or not to vote for that senator in the upcoming midterm elections. Is that right?
Absolutely. That is the correct reading, right on down to how each party is going to use this vote. Whether if you're in a conservative district with a large pro-life base, they're going to point to a vote against the codification of Roe v. Wade today. If you are in a more liberal-leaning district with a pro-choice base, then that candidate is going to vote to their yes vote on the codification of Roe v. Wade today.
Since this opinion was leaked, we've really been trying to hear from tribal leaders in particular about their thoughts on this overturning of Roe versus Wade. What have you heard?
You know, interestingly, I don't know that I've talked to as many elected tribal leaders, but I've talked to a lot of Native women on this issue. And as you know, there are traditional views on abortion, but there's also right now a very strong movement in protecting Native women from the MMIW, MMIP efforts. And this potential threat to women's safety in terms of driving young Native women into back alleys again to seek reproductive services, then that is of concern. So I think the discussion is certainly evolving, and I really see it as part of the toolkit for protecting Native women.
I want to switch gears because the Department of Interior is hosting some key consultations this week. Tell us about that.
Yes, back in March, we talked about this, that the Department of Interior announced consultations on what we call Part 251, Part 293 of the federal regulations. And Part 251 deals with land under trust and those processes. Part 293 deals with tribal state gaming compacts. These are really critical consultations and input. They had 2 sessions on Monday. They will have 2 more sessions on Friday, held by region. Those comments usually do have some differences by region as well. But as I mentioned then, when an administration wants to make change in policy, this is where the rubber hits the road. They go to the regulations, how these processes work. So tribal input on fee to trust will be very important, and extremely timely consultation on how the tribal state compact review and approval process works as well. So those will be taking place. I expect we will have a more formal proposal and draft of regulations in the coming months.
The other big news since we saw you last is, of course, Congressman Kai Kahele announcing that he is running for governor of Hawaii. What do you think this means for Indigenous communities?
Well, I'm very happy for Congressman Kahele. It's a rapid rise, and he's seen as a Democratic star in Hawaiian politics. He had a little bit of a rough bump in the road here, given his he had only returned 3 times to vote in the Congress. He had voted remotely. But I guess now we know why. He was planning this run for governor. So what it means for Native representation in the Congress is we are going to be losing 1 Indigenous member. And so we'll have 4, assuming they're all reelected. But that also means that we will have an Indigenous person as an executive of an influential state. And that too, right now we have Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. That is the highest Native American elected official in the state of Minnesota. So Governor Kahele Congressman Kahele running for governor, he's expected to be a front runner. If he wins the Democratic primary, he will win that race.
And we will be watching that primary very closely. It, of course, happens in August. Holly, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Ilya.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.